Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that gives you the secret stories and little-known facts behind your favorite music, movies, TV shows, and more. We are your two One-Eyed Willies of wanton over-explanation. My name's Jordan Runtagh.
These are just getting longer and longer. It's going to be a run-on sentence by the time we're through with it. And I'm Alex Heigl.
Yes, and today we are talking about the Goonies. Yes, one of my favorite movies of the 80s. We've had several requests for this one, which is really great. So nice to know that you're as excited about these as we are. Quick PSA, feel free to reach out with any topic requests. Find us on Twitter or whatever. We'd love to hear from you. But Goonies is a special one because this was one of those movies that I'd watch on repeat really almost every day as a kid. I loved it so much. I have nothing especially enlightening to say about it. I just think it's a wonderful movie. Basically, it's Junior Indiana Jones, which makes sense considering it came from the mind of Steven Spielberg. I personally love gang movies. Like this and The Sandlot definitely gave me unrealistic expectations about like friendship goals. And the Beatles too, I guess. You know, Sandlot, Goonies, Beatles, all great gangs. I was also really obsessed with shipwrecks as a kid, so this movie sent me into like my family basement in search of something akin to the treasure map that sets this plot in motion. Heigl, we talked a little bit about this earlier. What are your thoughts on this movie?
I don't have love for it the same way you do, but it's great. I don't know what you're going to on the Goonies. It's incredible. Yeah, right, yeah. I mean, it's firing on all cylinders. It's Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg. It's like, even if it didn't have the amazing cast that it had and the sort of rough-hewn charm, it would have still been a great movie just by virtue of those guys knew how to make movies. I don't know. I mean, we talked a little bit about this when we were first pitching this, but like the 80s like fantasy movie that I watched more was Eddie Murphy starring in The Golden Child.
Wait, I don't remember this at all. What is this?
It's like either The Golden Child or Big Trouble in Little China. Big Trouble in Little China I watched like...
Yeah, that
was Goonies for me. I watched that movie like weekly. But Golden Child is Eddie Murphy. It's like a weird fantasy movie about him like shepherding a mystical avatar of some kind back to Nepal, I think, or something. I don't know. It's just got this crazy, doesn't make any sense. It's not a good movie. It's just funny. Like, it's one of those things I just had laying around on VHS.
I've never even seen this movie before.
People don't really talk about it.
They don't want you to know about it.
Anyway.
Well, get ready because we're going to tell you all about Steven Spielberg's secret role as the unofficial co-director, the authentic blood and skulls used for props, and the real-life shipwreck that inspired the plot. We've also got the crazy connections between the Goonies, Gremlins, Back to the Future, and James Bond, plus Sloth's nightmarish makeup prosthetics that nearly electrocuted him. There's the onset feud between Corey Feldman and Martha Plimpton, the prank war between the Fratelli brothers, the time Michael Jackson called Sean Astin, and the lost subplot involving escaped gorillas. You'll learn how a bout of chickenpox almost cheated us out of Jeff Cohen's hilarious performance as Chunk, how the production crew built and destroyed a full-size pirate ship, and how Alice Cooper crashed the epic cast party. So without further ado, here is everything you didn't know about the Goonies. We're starting this with a section that I have subheaded Childhood Sads.
It's like this and dad issues.
Yep. Both coming together very often with Steven Spielberg. Like so many great things in this world, The Goonies was conceived by Steven Spielberg, who acted as executive producer and, as we'll find out, sort of a secret co-director, because he's Steven Spielberg and just couldn't help himself. So Spielberg was inspired by two things. The first being his childhood, again, because he's Steven Spielberg. He said that the idea of the Goonies came from a group of kids he knew as a boy in school. And Spielberg had a tough time in school because he struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia. And as a result, he learned to read a few years later than other kids in his class. And he was bullied mercilessly because of it. He described himself as being a nerd and an outsider growing up. Quote, like the kid that played clarinet in the band and orchestra, which I did. Which I personally take offense to because I did as well. And I recently went out of my way to tell that to a friend the other day. And now I'm wondering if I shouldn't have. Didn't know that the clarinet was that loaded of a band instrument.
Do you know that you can hear Spielberg playing clarinet on the Jaws soundtrack? No. It's when there's like a school marching band coming by and apparently they couldn't get like one of these. I guess they either Williams did it as a favor for him or they couldn't find like an actual orchestra musician to play enough to sound like a high school clarinet player that they just got Spielberg to do it. But you can see him playing clarinet there's photos of him playing clarinet on the set of Jaws. Really cute.
That's adorable. Aww.
Yeah.
But he was also bullied in his town as a kid because he was one of the only Jewish families in, I think, the neighborhood he was growing up in Arizona, which led him to be mocked and even beaten a little later in high school. And Spielberg apparently got revenge on his bullies one night by sneaking out and smearing peanut butter on their windows. The 50s, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, so during this rough period in Spielberg's youth, he was embraced by a gang of outsiders who sort of took them under their wing and made him feel included, and for a time, somewhat normal. This was, at its heart, the genesis of the Goonies, this gang of inclusive outsiders who go off in search of a legendary 17th century pirate's treasure. As I said, it's sort of an Indiana Jones adventure written by S.E. Hinton. For the legend of One-Eyed Willy and his ship, the Inferno, Spielberg was inspired by the wreck of the Santo Cristo de Burgos, which was a Spanish galleon that set sail from the Philippines to Mexico in 1693, but never made it to its destination. It vanished on its journey, taking with it a precious cargo of porcelain, silk, and beeswax. Something about bees not being indigenous to certain parts of the world. I don't know. Beeswax, hot commodity in the 1600s. So bizarrely, this Spanish galleon was thought to be shipwrecked off the coast of Astoria, Oregon, which is a long way off from Mexico. I guess the trade route would take it down the coast of Northern California, but they must have went off course somewhere to end up in Oregon. Indigenous tribes in what's now known as Oregon passed down stories about this galleon throughout the generations, calling it the beeswax wreck because of these blocks of beeswax that would wash ashore from it, as well as bits of blue and white porcelain and bits of wood would get tossed up on the rocks or buried in the sound every now and then. And this led to this whole run on the area by treasure hunters in the late 19th century, not long after the gold rush. And so these reports in this area about this being this lost pirate shipwreck, it wasn't a pirate shipwreck, but this lost Spanish galleon helped inspire Spielberg to create the One-Eyed Willy plot of the Goonies. And for years, this wreck was basically thought just to be like a local legend. But then in June 2022, just earlier this year, National Geographic confirmed that they found what was left of the Santo Cristo de Burgos. Found a few dozen timbers, which is extremely rare for a centuries-old ship in waters. And I think they found more beeswax, which is good. That's what the world needs. So it was a happy ending there.
First you get the money, then you get the beeswax, then you get the power. There's a famous British warship that sank near the Heigl Gate, which is that super cool name for the like stretch of water between Randall's Island and Astoria in New York. And something like $2 to $4 million in gold down there.
Did they get it?
There's a whole thing about treasure hunters trying to find it. But no, I think they blew it up because they were, this is maybe a little too NYC granular history, but this place was so treacherous that at one point the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers detonated, they just tried to blow it up, essentially to like blow up a bunch of the rocks in a crucial area to kind of change the flow of water. So they probably blew this ship up. Anyway, it's supposed to also be super haunted.
Well, I imagine
the Hellgate.
All shipwrecks
there are a bunch of like prisoners of war and I think slaves on this particular ship. So
so extra haunted. All shipwrecks are haunted. That one's extra haunted.
I forget the name of this ship. There was a great quote. The Hussar.
Oh, yeah.
You know the Hussar?
Well, go.
In 1876, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers blew 56,000 pounds or 25 tons of dynamite to try and blow that up, and failed or succeeded. I don't know what the metric of success is there.
That was what they were going to do for the Titanic. They were going to try to set off, before they realized it was like 2.5 miles down, they were going to try to set off explosives that were going to try to dislodge it and bring it to the surface. Or fill it with ping pong balls.
Oh, yes. I remember the ping pong balls bit. Yeah, I guess in 2013, they found, they found a cannon from it at least. And they were cleaning this cannon and they found out it was loaded. and still had nearly 2 pounds of gunpowder in it, which is like, oh my God. Can you
Somebody having a
imagine?
smoke break as they're cleaning this thing.
Yeah, you're at your nice docile job as a historical
Conservationist.
preservationist, and you find a fully loaded active cannon.
That's from The
Whoo!
Hustler?
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, getting back on track. Speaking of old wooden ships, Spielberg hired screenwriter Christopher Columbus to
See what we did there?
yeah,
Wooden
yeah.
ships? Yeah, look at that.
ties back together. Columbus had just written 1984's Gremlins, which is a personal favorite of mine, and he would obviously go on to direct Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire, the first 2 Harry Potter movies.
Bicentennial Man.
Ooh. Is this thing on? He brought his own ideas to the story, though. He grew up in Ohio, where he spent a lot of his youth exploring the abandoned coal mines. Not an activity I can recommend. This show does not condone
See, you're
that.
from Pennsylvania. I feel like that's...
Yeah, a lot of... Speaking of haunted places... Yeah, I don't know. I guess instead of the docks, his pitch was to have them all be in coal mines.
I have a question for you.
Go
I
on.
had always heard it as the Boonies or the Boondocks. The Goonies is a phrase I'd never heard unless it was in the context of this movie. Had you heard that?
Nope. So Boondocks. Oh, this is interesting. This will interest you. Boondocks comes from the word in Tagalog, bundock, for mountain. It was adapted by American soldiers stationed in the Philippines and then readopted in the early 20th century and then picked up again in World War II. So that's Boondocks. Goon. Oh boy, I thought it was going to get racist. Oh, there we go.
I'm sure it's early. It may.
Yeah, goon could be made up. Etymology Online traces it to Harper's in December of 21, possibly originating from sailor slang, referring to albatrosses or other big clumsy birds.
But I guess, yeah, Spielberg was probably like, you know what? Coal mines, not especially cinematic. What about a boat? What do you guys think about a boat?
Plus trying to imagine lighting all of that.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, there are a lot of rewrites on this movie. I didn't find anyone else credited. Did you find anyone who's like a script doctor on this, or it was they just kept sending it back to Chris Columbus?
It's like Becker or Fagan just be like, nope, not it.
Nope, that's not it. So yeah, I guess much like Xanadu, a recent episode, I guess the actors didn't get pages for their scenes until right before they were about to shoot, which sounds nerve-wracking.
And they're all kids too.
Yeah,
Kids are resilient. They'll bounce back. It's fine.
Yeah, I guess like they didn't even know what was happening to Chunk. They had no idea what his plot line was. They were just like, hey, he gets separated at some point. We haven't seen him for a couple of weeks.
Did you guys kill off Chunk?
Yeah. So I guess we mentioned Chris Columbus also wrote the script to Gremlins. And so there's a reference in Goonies to Gremlins. You said that this presupposes then that they take place in the same shared cinematic universe. So when Chunk calls the cops, they nod to this habit he had of prank calls. The officer reminds him of the time when he called with a story about little green creatures that multiply when you pour water on them. Gremlins. That movie was also executive produced by Spielberg and features a young Corey Feldman, who we'll get to. And there's another connection. Did you know that the town in Gremlins, which is Kingston Falls, is shot on the same soundstage as Back to the Future, the set for Mill Valley?
What? The Universal backlot. Wow, Court Square. My God. Well, on the topic of Back to the Futures, internet sleuths have discovered an interesting connection between the Goonies and Back to the Future, my favorite movie. Appropriately enough, it all has to do with time. There's a wall calendar seen 10 minutes into the Goonies that shows that it's October 1985, and there's also a newspaper front page that's seen around the 43-minute mark that's dated October 24th, 1985, which was a Thursday. And at one point in the movie, Mouth says that it's Saturday, 2 days later, which means that the whole movie takes place on October 26th, 1985. This is the exact day that Marty McFly takes the DeLorean back in time to 1955. And considering Spielberg was involved with Back to the Future too, I don't think there's any way that could be an accident.
This sets the stage for, and verbal contract, a movie in which Marty McFly meets the Goonies, meets the Gremlins.
Meets the Flintstones, meets the Jetsons.
in Viva Rock Vegas.
And the Flintstones kids with the WWE.
And the solid gold
Hulk
dancers.
Hogan. Yeah. And the Rockettes. Ladies and gentlemen, the aristocrats.
We do so much uncredited development work on this show. Like, come on. We are just spinning gold here.
Man. Well, getting back to Corey Feldman, as all things must do, he apparently goes way back with Spielberg. He talks about going to visit him on the set of Poltergeist, which Spielberg wrote, and depending on who you believe, may have covertly directed. Feldman claims that he was originally cast in E.T. as Elliot's best friend, but the role was written out. Sure. Feldman says that Spielberg felt so bad about this that he promised to put him in his next project that he was working on, which was Gremlins. Considering this is Corey Feldman, I'm inclined to call BS on this, but Spielberg does have a history of doing this. When he was casting for Hook, he really liked this one kid, but didn't cast him, but promised him he'd put him in his next movie, which was Jurassic Park. And that was the little boy in that, Joseph Mazzello. So he does have a track record of doing that.
Later went on to play Queen bassist John Deacon.
In Bohemian Rhapsody? I didn't
Yep.
know that until this morning. And
Yeah.
I almost texted you about it. That blew my mind.
Love John Deacon. Less so that movie.
Yes. So Gremlins led to Corey Feldman's involvement in Goonies, but he still had to audition. I guess Spielberg was originally slated to direct the Goonies, but then he dropped out and director Richard Donner took over, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. So Corey Feldman lost his favored status and had to go back to auditioning. So he goes to the audition and he meets another young kid in the waiting room who's also there to audition to play the character of Mouth, and that was Corey Haim. And they would famously be joined at the hip throughout the 80s and early 90s, becoming best friends and starring together in The Lost Boys and apparently 6 other movies together, too. Sweetly, Feldman said that after Haim's death in 2010, one of the first people to call him to check on him was his Goonies co-star, Sean Astin.
Sean
AKA
Astin just
Mikey.
seems like the sweetest
Yeah, he
boy
really
in the
does.
world. The goodest
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah. But as you can imagine, Feldman, kind of the opposite of the goodest boy. He would sometimes get on the rest of the cast's nerves. He was basically his character in the movie. He and Martha Plimpton, in particular, had kind of a tempestuous relationship, sort of a big sister, little brother relationship. She recalls flipping out on him one day. I was sitting at my typewriter doing my homework, and he came over and started annoying me. I got up from the typewriter and got him on the floor and started smashing his head on it, shouting, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." I think she tells the story like during some kind of Goonies event, like to his face. So I think they're okay now. When Feldman was a guest on Steve-O's Wild Ride podcast, friend of the pod, Steve-O, he said that he was only paid $40,000 for 6 months' work on the Goonies, which I find weird for a Spielberg production, but sure. Maybe that's just what his parents told him he earned. Yeah, he emancipated himself, I think, not long after. But yeah, Feldman remains inordinately proud of Goonies, calling it the Willy Wonka of our generation. I don't know if I get the analogy, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, poor Corey.
Yeah,
and kid who truly got chewed up and spit out by the entertainment industry.
Yeah. This leads us somewhat perfectly into the Michael Jackson corner. Yes, there's a line in the movie where Chunk talks about, some made-up story about Michael Jackson coming over to his house to use the bathroom, which is ironic because Corey Feldman had a burgeoning friendship with Michael Jackson around this time. Yes, director Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg apparently used the Jacksons as something of a carrot during the production. They sent the young cast to see the Jacksons' Victory reunion tour at Dodger Stadium during pre-production, just as a treat. And I guess when they were filming the pipe scene, the scene where they're all banging on the pipes to try to signal, that they need help to the people in town, Feldman, he didn't have the passion that director Richard Donner wanted. So Donner told him a little surprise that he was going to tell him later. He told him Michael Jackson's coming to visit the set tomorrow. And then they went to shoot the scene again. And Corey's all amped up because his hero's about to visit the set. And I think it's when he's the scene when he's screaming the line, "Reverse pressure." Yeah, it's interesting. Donner really, we'll talk about this later, had some really unique ways of trying to get good performances out of these kids. Kind of like Kubrick doing The Shining when he had this whole separate plot that he made up to tell the little boy who was playing Danny so that he didn't traumatize him by telling him the real plot. I don't know. I like Richard Donner's approach here. Sure enough, Michael did come onto the set. There's amazing pictures of him on One-Eyed Willy's pirate ship with his arm around Chunk, which is kind of funny because it validated Chunk's BS story from earlier in the plot about hanging with Michael Jackson. So Corey Feldman was close friends with Michael, and the two later became estranged for reasons that are murky, but well, actually, you, I believe, have found
I have
an
something that
explanation
I
as to why this
desperately hope is true.
Yeah, what's that? Why
Well-
did Corey Feldman and Michael Jackson fall out?
One of the reasons that I've read cited was that Michael Jackson was afraid of how Corey Feldman was going to talk about him in one of his books that he'd written, and backed off accordingly. But Feldman, the whole we have to talk about 9/11 when we talk about Corey Feldman and Michael Jackson. I don't know if people know this, but apparently Michael Jackson drove Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, and Liza Minnelli out of New York on 9/11.
There was a made-for-TV movie with
Joseph Fiennes in
yes.
it. Yeah, in like whiteface. It's deeply upsetting. So that's a real thing that happened, and apparently Feldman was not included in this, and he was upset about that. He retaliated with a song called Megalo Man that features the lyrics, "I believed in your words, I believed in your lies, but in September in New York, you left me to die. I love you, Megalo Man." So,
as in megalomaniac.
yeah.
Okay.
So their relationship fell apart either because of what Michael was afraid that Corey was going to write about, or because of 9/11. Potato.
I am not being sarcastic when I say, why don't more people know about this? That's wow. Okay.
Well, apparently this road trip ended up in Ohio. Either they got on so well, or they were just like so petrified of being on the East Coast that they drove into f***ing Ohio. And I read that Marlon Brando was like, this is in full-figured Brando era. So they, I guess he was like constantly asking to stop for fast food and annoying everyone else in the car. Yeah, that's a hell of a movie. That's a great movie that should be made. It deserves better.
Well, they made it.
No, it deserves better than that. I mean,
Oh.
I'm talking prestige. I want Daniel Day-Lewis in there. I want Meryl Streep. No, Meryl Streep could play Elizabeth Taylor.
Oh, big time.
I'm
yeah.
developing again. Damn it.
I mean, here's a question. I mean no offense when I say this. Do you think the car trip, do you think it was funny?
Do I think it was funny?
Yeah,
Probably
I mean,
fucking Scream. Are you imagining? Imagine all those personalities in that car. It's better if it was like a compact. If they weren't in like a and they weren't a limo.
wait,
or
was
something.
Michael driving?
God, that's a great question. I wonder who drove. I don't know, man.
Maybe they took turns.
Liz McNeil wrote about this at People.
Oh.
Tim Mendelsohn, a close friend and trustee of Elizabeth Taylor's estate, shot down the rumors, saying there was never any road trip. Elizabeth was in New York after 9/11. Wow, that is wild. So, Corey Feldman, you wrote that diss track Megalo Man for nothing. All right, well, that was one of our most bizarre tangents we've ever been on this.
Well, I mean, Corey's become a passionate crusader against child sexual abuse, and although he's repeatedly insisted that nothing inappropriate ever happened with him and Michael, after seeing the explosive Leaving Neverland documentary in 2019, he said he no longer felt comfortable defending Michael, and also admitted the possibility that Jackson could have been grooming him as part of their friendship. So, yeah.
But he's still dressing up as him. As recently as 2013, he did a Michael Jackson tribute performance in costume, performing Billie Jean at a Limp Bizkit show. So there's that.
Okay. Michael took an active interest in
more than one young boy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really trying to find a way to say that didn't land on that phrasing. But yeah, the movie star Sean Astin. and he even called him at home. Sean Astin told Vulture in 2017, "I remember Michael Jackson once called to see if I was feeling okay because I'd gone home sick from the set of the Goonies. They'd shut down production for a couple days. I was so excited he called, but he didn't leave his number. And the first thing my mom said was, 'I don't understand. What does he want? Why is he calling you?'" And Sean Astin's mom was Patty Duke, who was a child actress in the 60s who'd starred in The Patty Duke Show and won an Oscar for her portrayal of Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker, and probably most relevant to my tacky interests, starred as Neely O'Hara in Valley of the Dolls. So, yeah, she probably being a former child star herself and having gone through it, she probably was very wary of who was coming around her son.
God. Speaking of Sean Astin, yeah, his family history is really fascinating. For years, no one had any idea who his father was.
Including him
and his mom. She had a relationship with Desi Arnaz Jr., who is Lucy and Ricky's son. But she also had a relationship with a music journalist named Michael Tell. And so when she got pregnant, she didn't know who the dad was. Michael Tell, this being the 70s, offered to marry her to keep her out of the tabloid sheets. But their marriage lasted 13 days. God.
Damn.
Couldn't even make it 2 weeks.
That's got to be a record.
Yeah. That's like Pam Anderson and John Peters territory. Do you not remember that?
No. John Peters, the producer?
The very same. He was married to Pam Anderson.
Pam Anderson.
Yeah.
Baywatch, Pam Anderson. John Peters, played by Bradley Cooper in Licorice Pizza.
God, I love Tail so much. It's gonna kill me. Yeah. How long were they married? 12 days. Oh, they beat them. 12 days. Yeah, this was big page 6 when I was working there.
This is 2020.
He claimed
God.
He claimed that he paid off all of her debts.
Wow.
And then
I had no idea.
they split. She had almost $200,000 in bills and no way to pay it. And then he said, "And this is the thanks I get."
Oh, ew.
Well, he's kind of a scumbag, so.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes.
Anyway, 13-day marriage. Jesus Christ. Where the fuck were we? Sean was born in 1971, so Patty's marriage to Michael Tell was over by that point. A year later, she married John Astin, who played Gomez in the Addams Family.
And was the dad on the original Freaky Friday.
And John Astin adopts Sean and gives him his last name.
Patty Duke and John Astin then split when Sean was a teenager. And Patty married another guy named Michael Pierce. And this was the same year that Sean was filming The Goonies. Patty told him that Desi Jr. was his real dad. And so he got really close with Desi Jr. And then after 10 years of believing this, he took a blood test and learned that music journalist Michael Tell, the guy of the 13-day marriage, was actually his dad.
And yeah, further evidence in Sean Astin just being the goodest boy. He has a very zen view on it all. He says he's close to all 4 of them, saying, "I can call any of them on the phone anytime I want to. John, Desi, Mike, or Papa Mike. My 4 dads." I guess John Astin and Patty Duke were divorcing by the time Goonies came out, but they held hands and cried through their entire first viewing of it because they were so proud of their little boy.
Aww.
Sean, as testified by a long career in Hollywood, inherited his Oscar-winning mother's talent. And the scene where he tells the story of One-Eyed Willy is improvised, or at the very least, recalled from very short memory. Richard Donner wanted to get a naturalistic performance read out of this scene. So just before they shot this, Donner told him the story of One-Eyed Willy. And then when the cameras were basically said, "All right, just repeat that as best you can while the cameras are rolling." So that's why it kind of looks like,
He's like recalling it in real time. Yeah.
Because he was. Yeah.
I love that. I love all the ways that Richard Donner got these really natural performances out of these kids.
Despite hating them.
Yeah. We'll talk about that. Yep. Just a quick pause here before we go any further. One-Eyed Willy. That is a dirty joke,
it
right?
Has to be.
That's obviously
it has to be. Come on.
Okay, good. I just want to check. There are really a disproportionate number of kids with famous parents in this movie. Or maybe it's Hollywood nepotism. I don't know. It just seems weird to me. In addition to Sean Astin, there's Martha Plimpton, who's the daughter of Keith Carradine, and also distantly related to the writer George Plimpton. In a way, aren't we all distantly related to the writer George Plimpton? And, of course, you have Josh Brolin, the son of noted handsome man actor James Brolin, who's still alive. I didn't realize. This was Josh Brolin's film debut, and he was very intense and eager. In fact, he was a bit of a tryhard. He'd been reading about the Stanislavski method of acting, and he later recalled the day that they were filming the scene where the Goonies slide through the underground water tunnels that dump them out into the water around the pirate ship. And Brolin later said, I came up to Spielberg and said that I wanted to climb the walls of the tunnels and that it represented my mother's womb for some odd reason. Spielberg's response was, why don't you just act?
I would prefer it if it were Richard Donner and he was just like, son of a bitch, I'm so sick of these damn kids.
It's just shades of the Dustin Hoffman Laurence Olivier exchange during Marathon Man when Dustin Hoffman's like, oh, I've lost my motivation, and Olivier's like,
why don't you try acting, darling?
Yeah. Yeah, the directorial approaches on this movie were a little less high concept than Stanislavski. I guess when director Richard Donner wanted more intensity, he would just yell, big eyes, during a major scene. Works every time. Josh Brolin has one of my favorite lines in this movie when he's yelling at his younger brother, Mikey. I'm going to hit you so hard when you wake up, your clothes are going to be out of style.
Yeah.
It's a great line, yeah. There's a funny little goof in the scene where the Goonies are in the abandoned restaurant where the Fratellis are hiding out, like just after Chunk breaks the water cooler. Sean Astin, a.k.a. Mikey, calls Josh Brolin by his real name instead of his character, Brand, but they left that in for some reason. Speaking of Chunk, we have to talk about the kid who played him, the amazing Jeff Cohen. Truly the MVP of this movie. He is so good. Yet it's, I believe, the only live-action role he ever did. And we very nearly didn't even get that. He got chickenpox just before the shoot and was worried that they'd recast the role if he told them about it. So he didn't tell anyone, and he showed up anyway, I'm sure leading to an outbreak of chickenpox on the set of The Goonies. And you can see it when he's doing the Truffle Shuffle and lifting his shirt up. You can actually see the spots still on his chest and stomach. I feel really bad for this kid. He really hated doing the Truffle Shuffle. Like that look of dismay you see on his face when Mouth makes him do it is like authentic. And to make him feel better, director Richard Donner actually cleared the set when he did it, which is, yeah, I know. I really feel bad for him. Richard Donner really loved this kid, Jeff Cohen, who played Chunk. In the scene where Chunk starts crying when the Fratellis take his ice cream and spoon away, you could actually hear Donner giggling off screen if you listen to it. I think Jeff Cohen, the kid who played Chunk, actually ad-libbed a lot of that. I know he ad-libbed the Hebrew prayer that he says when he first sees Jake Fratelli. And the scene where he tells the story about vomiting off a theater balcony is just an inspired performance. The anecdote itself is a real-life prank that Spielberg did when he was growing up in Arizona. I don't know much more about it beyond that. I'd love to hear Spielberg explain how he fake vomited in the middle of a theater. But yeah, this kid, Jeff Cohen, is just so damn good. He appeared on a very famous British chat show called Wogan, just himself, not with the rest of the cast of the movie, right after Goonies came out, and he's absolutely hysterical. Check it out on YouTube. He's wearing this like bizarre duck hat that has wings that randomly flaps. And like he handles all sorts of like really terrible body shamey questions from the host with just incredible quick comebacks. It's really funny. Perhaps because of all this flack about his weight, he left acting soon after the Goonies. He slimmed down and pursued a law degree, but his reputation as Chunk followed him wherever he went. He ran for class president at UC Berkeley with the slogan Chunk for President, which, use what you got. Good publicity. It was also during his college days that he performed the Truffle Shuffle for the only time publicly. He later said, I was the mic man at the football games, trying to pump the crowd up. I wasn't certain everyone knew who I was. I got up there to say, go Bears, and this frat guy in the back row started screaming, Truffle Shuffle. Then the last 3 rows started chanting it. Next thing you know, it caught on, and 10,000 students were cheering, Truffle Shuffle.
Poor guy.
So I know, but now he works as an entertainment lawyer where he counts the kid who played Data among his many clients. I didn't realize the kid who played Data is also in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, he was Short Round as well in Temple of Doom. Yeah, when that movie came out, he did a bunch of interviews where he was talking about how disillusioned he was with Hollywood after being in these 2 enormous back-to-back movies and then just being unable to find work because of the climate of Hollywood racism. You also will remember this is the era of Long Duck Dong being in 16 Candles. So not only were there not opportunities for people of Asian descent to be in movies, but Hollywood was just comfortable being openly racist towards them. But yeah, he had a really interesting career. I guess he worked in Hong Kong for a while. He was choreographing fight scenes. He was doing AD, assistant directing work for Wong Kar-wai, who's a cultishly adored director.
Oh.
Yeah, Everything Everywhere All at Once whips. So happy ending for him after years of misery.
Well, speaking of offensive names in films, I guess Data's real name in this movie is Richard Wang. Dick Wang.
Oh, boy.
Come on. You'll notice how everyone in this movie has a nickname: Data, Chunk, Sloth, Brand, and their real names are rarely, if ever, mentioned. But we here at Too Much Information have dug them up, and Mikey is Michael Walsh, obviously. Mouth is Clark Devereaux. Data, we just said, Richard Wang. Brand is Brandon Walsh. Chunk is Lawrence Cohen. Andy is Andrea Teresa Carmichael. It's boring. And Steph is Stephanie Steinbrenner. And Sloth is Lotney Fratelli. I remember his mom says that a couple times. Lotney. That's a name. Funny story. The real life last names of all the Goonies end in the letter N. Aston, Brolin, Cohen, Feldman, Green, Plimpton, and Kwan.
Wow.
Look at that. Check that out. Yeah. You seem genuinely, wow, okay, that's cool.
That's called acting.
Oh. I'm glad you tried it.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
But enough about the prep. Let's get into the shooting of the Goonies. When Spielberg stepped away from directing, presumably because he had his hands full with Indiana Jones and all sorts of other stuff, they brought in director Richard Donner, late of the Superman series starring Christopher Reeve, and he went on to direct Radio Flyer, written by the guy who wrote The Sandlot, as we discussed in a previous episode. The Goonies was shot almost entirely on location in the town of Astoria, Oregon, though the tunnels and the cave with One-Eyed Willy's pirate ship were shot on sound stages in Burbank, California. The shoot went on for 5 months and was done almost entirely sequentially, which is very rare.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah. As you can imagine, the Goonies is a huge boon for the tourist trade in Astoria, a huge goon, if you will. They celebrate Goonies Day. Thank you. They celebrate Goonies Day on June 7th, which was the day the film was released in 1985. The jail where the Fratellis make their escape at the start of the movie is now a film museum, appropriately enough, which opened on the 25th anniversary of the Goonies' release in 2010 and contains memorabilia from the movie. And this is weird. I didn't know where else to put this. The field where the Fratellis' restaurant hideout is located was used again in the movie Kindergarten Cop. There you go. Yeah. And this is really funny. The actor who played Mr. Walsh, Mikey and Brand's dad, is a guy named Keith Walker. He was so inspired by the scenery of Astoria that he wrote his one and only screenplay, Free Willy.
Free Willy and Free Willy 2 were both filmed in Astoria.
Electric Boogaloo, yeah.
That
Free
joke
Willy 2, Secret of the Ooze.
Willy Harder.
Yeah. Never gets old.
A good day to Free Willy. Free Willy with a Vengeance. Just all the Die Hard ones are so funny. They filmed Black Stallion there as well. There was this whole run of mid 80s to early 90s movies filmed in Astoria, Oregon.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Beautiful Astoria. Visit Astoria.
Yeah.
I'll take that money now, Astoria, Oregon Town Council.
The Walsh family home became something of a local landmark known as the Goonies house. The nice lady who lived there spent years giving tours to the fans who'd show up on her doorstep from all over the world, sometimes up to 50 people a day. But our dear producer, Mike Johns, paid a visit to Astoria a few years back and discovered that there's now a sign on the property warning off trespassers and Goonie fans. Apparently, during the 30th anniversary of the Goonies in 2015, the home was descended upon by an army of rowdy fans who trampled the grounds, peed in the bushes, and generally wrecked the place. This is why we can't have nice things. I just want to pause for a minute. We got to give a shout out to our beloved Mike. It's truly criminal that we mention our fictitious producer, Jamie, more than we do our actual colleague and buddy. Mike is not only the best friend this show has ever had, but also one of the best friends anyone could ask for. makes us sound way better than we deserve and is an incredible musician. Go to Mike's YouTube channel and Bandcamp, Meaning of Everything. My personal favorite is this gorgeous tribute to the recently departed Loretta Lynn, this amazing shoegaze version of You Ain't Woman Enough. Mike, we love you. Sorry we made you listen to us talk about Steely Dan the other day for 90 minutes.
We'll get a Jethro Tull episode in for you
one
of these days. We touched earlier on Steven Spielberg's habit of ghost directing to the to the consternation of the actual directors. I mean, the famous one that I remember is Poltergeist and Tobe Hooper.
Yeah.
It's so talked about, especially in the horror nerd community. But yeah, it got so bad that I think Spielberg at one point had to take out a Variety ad where he was like, I did not co-direct this movie, because I think it was a whole DGA, Directors Guild issue. But I mean, I don't know. It's just funny that it is such a running theme with Spielberg in particular. One of Tobe Hooper's collaborators, Mick Garris, said in 2017 that the same thing happened on the set of Used Cars to Robert Zemeckis, to the point where Kurt Russell told Spielberg, I can take direction from you or Bob, but not both. And Spielberg backed off, which is amazing because I mean, if somebody's going to intimidate Steven Spielberg, it's probably going to be 80s Kurt Russell.
Yeah, say Escape from New York era Kurt Russell.
But yeah, Richard Donner had known him since he was a kid, which probably made all of this backseat directing that much more galling. Spielberg got started on shows in the early 70s, like Marcus Welby and an episode of Columbo.
I want to see that.
Yeah, and so Donner was kind of shepherding him through that. And so despite the fact that Spielberg was basically only a producer and had a story by credit on the actual log line of the film, there are photos of him walking around the set with a baseball hat reading Head Goonie. And different cast members have said that he was
such a dickish thing.
Oh, it's awful. It's awful. Side note, I love the cottage industry of like film crews making, like, I love film merchandise, like film production merchandise.
That's just for the crew.
Did you ever hear about the battle that happened on the set of Blade Runner?
No.
Ridley Scott gave this interview, famously protracted shoot. Ridley Scott gave this interview where he was talking about how much he liked working with English crews better than American crews, because he said English crews would just say, yes, governor, and do what he asked. And so all of the American crewmen made a series of sarcastic T-shirts that just said, yes, governor, on the back. And wore it all.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
But yeah, some of the Goonies cast members have basically said that Spielberg was co-directing this thing. He was shooting the aforementioned pipe banging, underground pipe banging scene, phrasing, and the scene at the wishing well where Andy, the rich girl, accidentally kisses little Mikey.
Makes so much sense. I mean, that just looks like such a Spielberg scene. There's this great, like, still photo of Mikey and Andy in silhouette, and, like, they look like cartoons. They look like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell or something. Like, all of his childhood stuff really just has this kind of, I mean, no wonder he went on to do Hook a couple years later. Like, there's always, like, this kind of little magical element with all the child stuff. I mean, E.T., obviously. This scene's great. Sean Astin, who was like 13, was super pumped to kiss the woman playing Andy, Carrie Green, who was like 17. Carrie Green, on the other hand, thought the whole thing was creepy and was worried she'd traumatize this little kid.
Yeah, well,
he seems to be doing fine.
Yeah, Sean Astin's doing okay. But yeah, this tough set for Donner. One of his associates later said, I think it was a difficult time because it's very difficult to have a producer on the set who's also a director. And I think Dick allowed Spielberg to shoot a lot of second unit stuff. I'd imagine it wasn't the warmest or easiest of collaborations. Promotion for this movie made a big deal about Spielberg teaming up with Richard Donner, who was still a big deal at the time. And there was even a teaser trailer for the Goonies that took the letters from its title sequence from the famous movies that Spielberg and Donner had just been involved with. The G from Gremlins, the O from The Omen, the O from Raiders of the Lost Ark, N from Close Encounters, an I from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, E from E.T., and the S from Superman, which doesn't have anything to do with the movies, but it belongs in the annals of great teaser trailers. Surely an annal.
Get people pumped.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's another thing that Spielberg brought into this, which was a boatload of James Bond references. Dada's belt.
I love this.
You'll notice, which has all of his gadgets, has 007 inscribed on it.
And he also, in the scene when he's ziplining into Mikey's house, he plays the James Bond theme on a Walkman or something.
Oh, yeah.
Spielberg threw that in there in exchange for Bond producer Albert Cubby Broccoli using the Close Encounters theme in 1979's Moonraker, the Bond movie.
Yeah, and funnily enough, 4 years after Goonies came out, Robert Davi, one of the Fratellis, plays the villain, not the 2000s indie band, who we'll get to later. Davi played a villain in the misbegotten, the redheaded stepchild of the Bond franchise, Timothy Dalton's License to Kill.
Yeah, that's one of the less.
Ding-a-ling, ding,
one of the
ding,
lesser.
ding, 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 ding.
That and like late era.
Oh, Brosnan?
Late era Brosnan,
Yeah. Speaking of Joey Pants.
Yes, you love Joey Pants, and I love how much you love Joey Pants.
An Italian
king.
Italian-American legend.
This brings us to the Fratelli brothers, Robert Davi and Joey Pants. What is his real name?
Joe Pantoliano.
Yes. Apparently, Robert Davi, who's a trained opera singer, by the way, that's why he's singing Madame Butterfly all the time in the movie. He's supposed to be in Rambo 2 or Rambo First Blood, whatever the second Rambo was.
Yeah, the second one is confusingly titled First Blood Part 2.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right.
First Blood Part 2.
So he'd gotten in shape for it and was poised to fly to the jungle to film, but I guess there was a communication snafu when he accepted the Goonies, and they mistakenly recast his part, which made things weird between him and his friend Sylvester Stallone for a while. And, maybe he took his frustration out on his Goonie brother, Joey Pants. The two were engaged in a fairly high-stakes prank war throughout the shoot. At one point, Robert Davi nailed Joey's dressing room door shut, I believe with him inside. And Joey retaliated, this isn't as good, by stealing his license plate. And I guess the director sort of cottoned on to their antagonistic, I don't know how playful it was, but relationship. And he put this sibling rivalry in the movie. Another instance of Robert Davi's aggression coming through was the scene when they're making the jailbreak and they shoot the gasoline, which causes it to ignite. They were originally going to light a dollar bill and try to throw it on the gas line, but Davi said that it would take too long for this piece of paper to land just right. Which is kind of like what happened in Grease when they were trying to get Sandy's cigarette to land right at her feet, right in front of Danny. So he came up with the idea of just shooting it, which I don't even know if that actually would cause gasoline to ignite, but
looks cool.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Maybe the bullet ricochets off the ground. Maybe there's a little spark that happens there. I don't know.
And Ramsey really slapped him in that scene, Robert Davi.
Yeah.
Which,
I'm glad we got Anne Ramsey in here because I didn't have any factoids about her. Well,
throw Mama from the train.
She's so scary.
Yeah,
I think that's like subconsciously why I didn't.
I'm still frightened of her.
I am.
She's still alive? She could be.
No.
She could be right behind you. No, she died in 88.
The year after I was born.
That wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah. Is it safe yet? Okay.
While we're running down the Fratelli family, we must get to the third Fratelli brother, Lotney, a.k.a. Sloth, played by former Oakland Raiders star John Matuszak, who did 2 stints in the Super Bowl before trying his hand at acting. He wears a Raiders shirt in the movie, which could be construed as just a Pirates joke, but actually a nod to his old team. And then he rips that shirt to reveal a Superman shirt under that, which is, of course, a nod to Richard Donner, who had directed the Superman. Spielberg loves his Easter eggs as a running theme that will develop into this. I guess before the Goonies was even filmed, a few years prior, Matuszak had placed 9th in World's Strongest Man competition, where those huge, beefy slabs of men like tow trucks and bench press tires, and he just looks like it looks like Animal.
A mountain?
From the,
yes, he does. Yes,
or
he
the
does.
mountain from Game of Thrones, yes. Just a large slab of a man. The stunt double for Sloth is a guy named Randall Widner. And he just said, I don't drink, so I would escort John Matuszak to all the bars so I could get him home. I was the John Wrangler. I'd drink Coca-Cola and make sure he didn't beat up the place. He said Matuszak was a big kid with very few limitations about how he conducted himself. He was taking painkillers, and when you put a gallon of wine on top of that, you have trouble controlling yourself at times. He was like a lost child in a lot of ways.
Oh.
But yeah, a bit of a partier. He died in 1989 at the age of 38. Accidental prescription drug overdose, had traces of cocaine in his bloodstream, but still a hell of a life. And his time in the Goonies was checkered. 5 hours of makeup each day took to get him into that. And one of these prosthetic eyes was manually operated by remote control. So someone would start a count off camera and he would blink his other eye at the appropriate time to sync them up. And then for the scenes in the pirate ship, all the kids were told him not to get wet because this was an electrical rig. And they promptly did anyway, which prompted a shooting shutdown of a week.
Like, Sloth can't blink.
The cigar shopping executive. I'm looking at the dailies and Sloth can't blink. Shut it down. Doc Brolin's pay.
Oh, come on. You can know it's Feldman.
Yeah, it would have been Feldman. Bring me that Feldman kid again. I'm going to carve my initials into his chest. Matt Duzek had horrific back pain due to his years in the NFL and had a tough time actually picking up chunk and throwing the people around in the movie. Fun fact, the candy bar he eats in the movie was supposed to be an Almond Joy rather than a Baby Ruth.
Here's a fun fact. That's the trivia question I got right on our episode of Food Court with Richard Blaze, where I triumphed over you for defending milk chocolate.
Where I handily defeated you in single combat. The novelization of this movie, did you have this?
No.
Because I know you're a novelization guy a little bit.
Not really.
No.
To tell you the truth, the only reason I had movie novelizations were when I was going to elementary school and I wished I could be watching a movie, but I couldn't. So I would be reading the novelization.
Yeah, I was a big novelization guy. I had a bunch of those. I would always just get them at the half-price bookstore when we were on vacation and just read them. I'll tell you, the novelization of the movie Blade, 1998's Blade, that book taught me how to curse. As a child, I had no idea there were so many permutations on the F word. Speaking of improv, do you know Wesley Snipes at a table read improv the single best line from that movie, which is some motherfucker's always trying to ice skate uphill right before he kills the bad guy? Wesley Snipes, ladies and gentlemen.
Friend of the pod.
The friend of the pod, Wesley Snipes. Anyway, the novelization of this movie delves deeper into Sloth's life, revealing that after the events of the movie, Chunk's parents adopt him and throw him a bar mitzvah. That is adorable. Imagine Sloth reading the Torah. You're not going to get me to do that impression. There was also a scene that was storyboarded but never shot where Sloth flexes for Steph, Martha Plimpton, who swoons over him saying Hunk City. God, the deleted scenes of this movie are so weird. We'll get into Gorilla.
Oh, yeah, we haven't even gotten
later.
into the best ones yet, yeah.
The pirate movie that Sloth watches while he's chained up in the basement is the 1935 Errol Flynn swashbuckling classic Captain Blood. Dave Grusin, who did the score to this, recycled some of the cues from those classic movies for this film's score, specifically from Adventures of Don Juan, which does star Errol Flynn. Yeah, and it's such a cute turn for his character. You know, he's watching the Errol Flynn movies, and then he gets his
in captivity.
Yes, while chained in a basement by his family.
Who among us?
And then he gets to do this pirate ship. He gets to slide in at the end, just like Errol Flynn. Speaking of the set, the epic showdown with the Fratelli family aboard One-Eyed Willy's treasure-laden pirate ship, the Inferno, hidden in a massive cave. This was one of the scenes that was filmed on a stage in California, required 900,000 gallons of water.
That sounds like a made-up figure, but I don't, Well,
I mean, a bit rich, considering California's been in like a 30-year drought. That's,
how old's Goonies?
Yeah, that's correlation. This was the same set where the water chute slides were used, which dumps them into the water in the pirate cave. That was a fully functioning water slide, courtesy of the Langford Surf Coaster Corporation. Anyway, anybody, did they do anything else? Whatever. Richard Donner later said that he and the crew would sneak off after a busy day of filming to ride those water slides, which is adorable, along with Friend of the pod, Harrison Ford, who once stopped by the set and, according to Corey Feldman, was climbing around the caves with all of the kids.
This is like the one moment of joy Richard Donner had after 14-hour days of being tortured by Corey Feldman. Josh Brolin going up to him, coming up some weird
talking about his
edible
womb
thing. Yeah.
Richard Donner just pours himself many martinis and rides the water
Goes
slide.
on the water slide.
That ship was real and had been built especially for the production over the course of only 2.5 months.
That's insane.
Movie magic.
Yeah, or underpaid people.
105. Well, yeah, 105. Well, today they would have just done it in CGI. At least the prop people were union, so they would at least making okay money. Fun fact, folks, always remember when you're watching these CGI monstrosities that those are not union jobs. And that is why they are constantly being favored as opposed to practical effects, makeup, and wardrobe. Anyway, all 105 feet of that ship were designed to resemble Errol Flynn's ship from the film The Seahawk. Some of that rigging was recycled from the Pirates of the Caribbean ship at Disneyland, which was being renovated at the time. The sails on that ship required over 7,000 square feet of material. The largest one of them was 60 by 30. And you can spot R2-D2 squirreled away in there because, once again, Spielberg loves his little Easter eggs.
In order to get an authentically overwhelmed reaction from the cast, Richard Donner forbade the kids from seeing the ship before they shot the scene. And it was constructed on another set and was hidden behind a very gigantic tarp, I imagine. Donner later said, "The day we were going to film them first seeing it, we backed them all into the water and set the cameras. On action, they knew what they were going to see, but they didn't know what it was going to look like." I love this. During some Goonies event with Richard Donner in 2001, Corey Feldman claimed that he snuck onto the ship while it was being built, and a visibly annoyed Richard Donner just tried to shrug off these claims.
Richard Donner hates Corey Feldman.
Like 15 years later, Corey Feldman's still making his life a living hell.
Being haunted by Corey Feldman.
And for the most part, for these kids, seeing the ship for the first time was a really emotional moment. And Martha Plimpton later said she almost started to cry, and Sean Astin's mouth just dropped open, and he remembered thinking, the whole adventure we gone through had a happy ending. The ship. But
yeah, because they filmed it sequentially. They filmed it in order, right?
Exactly.
So, I love it so much.
But the whole thing sort of backfired. Josh Brolin was so shocked, he apparently let an S-bomb slip, which supposedly required the scene to be shot again. Maybe just the master shot. I don't know. I'm not sure, because I think some of those close-ups of them reacting to it are authentic first reactions. I've seen multiple explanations for this. I prefer to think that some of the close-up reactions for that are real. The swearing in this movie is really funny for a PG movie.
Yeah.
The S word and its variations are used 20 times throughout this movie. And in order to skirt a harsher rating, the profanity was strategically placed so that it could be drowned out by background noise like police sirens or running water, or just the film's score during TV broadcasts. And it was also edited in a really specific way so that all you had to do was trim the first or last few seconds of a scene to lose the swear word, which is very clever. You may notice that in the scene where rocks are falling from the cave ceiling, Data screams, "Holy S-H-I-T." He spelled it out because his mother made him promise not to use any bad words in the movie, which is adorable. This brings us to my favorite segment of this show. It belongs in a museum. Probably the biggest instance of it belongs in a museum that we've ever had. The 105-foot Inferno ship would have made an absolutely incredible tourist attraction. Unfortunately, no one had the foresight or the money to make this a reality. No one wanted this pirate ship after the shoot, so it was destroyed. That beautiful pirate ship. Oh my God, that breaks my heart. But
that hurts.
Yeah, right? I know. You'd think that we could just save it to use. I guess there aren't that many movies that require, wooden pirate ships, but you'd think that it would be handy to have around on a backlot somewhere, but I guess not. But there's another treasure from the Goonies which has gone missing for a far more frustrating reason. The map to One-Eyed Willy's treasure. Map it's so badass. It comes to us courtesy of production designer J. Michael Riva, who I believe is also responsible for the ship as well. He put his sweat and blood into this map, literally. The night before he was due to drop it off, he came to the conclusion that it looked too new. It was supposed to be 300 years old. So he set about trying to age it in his hotel room, pouring coffee onto it, that old trick, and even cutting his finger to drip his own blood around the edges. Which the coffee or tea trick to age paper, I've heard that. Not heard smearing blood around paper. Yeah. He later
OSHA
said,
violation.
Yeah, very much so. He later said, you do these crazy things, you get so into it. And it worked. You look at the map and it looks like an old map that's seen many years and battles. So that's gross. The map was given to Sean Astin, Mikey, who treasured it for many years, until his mother, Patty Duke, came across it in his room and threw it away, thinking it was an old scrap of paper. That hurts a lot. Yeah, I know. Yeah. That almost cancels out Valley of the Dolls.
Speaking of OSHA violations, there is at least one Goonies prop that has been lovingly preserved for posterity: the skull of One-Eyed Willy. Richard Donner kept that on display in a stand in his home next to a model of the Inferno pirate ship until his death last year. We don't know where it is right now, right?
I would assume that it's got to be well accounted for somewhere.
Yeah. According to a website dedicated to the film Goonies, it was mentioned on the cast list that the skeleton of One-Eyed Willy was played by...
Was real. Well, I think you're bearing the lead here. It's a real skull.
It's a real skull.
Yeah.
Belonged supposedly to a guy named Raoul Wu, who died from lead poisoning.
I have not been able to track down any more on that.
Why would you want a lead poisoned skull on the set of your children's movie?
Why would you want a real skull at all?
Well, an actor prepares. There's a scene was storyboarded but never shot where Mikey and Andy find One-Eyed Willy with daggers in the eye sockets, and Andy has to pull them out. Speaking of auction materials, Jordan.
Yes, as a point of fact, the Lou Gehrig baseball card that Mikey finds on Chester Copperpot's body is worth $275,000 at auction in mint condition. And according to international maritime salvage law, the rights to salvage a vessel and its contents go to the person or persons who first successfully bring something off the vessel in question. In this case, this is Mikey, who brought the jewels off the ship. So legally, the Inferno and everything on it belongs to him, including One-Eyed Willy's body.
Surely the first time we have ever cited international maritime law on the pod.
This is episode 63. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took that long, to be honest.
We're coming up on about probably roughly 3 straight days of us talking at each other. And I'm amazed it took that long for that to come up. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment. And this brings us to the end of the movie. And you'll notice at the end of the movie, Data, when he gets to the beach talking to a group of reporters, says, the octopus was very scary. I always thought this was just the kids telling tall tales.
Yeah.
Even though Data's probably the most trustworthy of the bunch. I don't know, maybe Mikey too. But this line actually refers to a deleted scene that involves Steph and Mouth, Martha Plimpton and Corey Feldman, getting attacked by an octopus after they try to flee One-Eyed Willy's ship. And since this was pre-CGI, as you mentioned, this all had to be practical effects, so they built a 32-foot octopus. But unfortunately, the general consensus was that the octopus looked kind of goofy and basically too silly to be considered scary for what was the climax of the movie. Sean Astin put it bluntly, the octopus always sucked. But the octopus featured prominently in the promo campaign for the movie. It appeared in trading cards that were made as toys. It also appeared in the video for the Cyndi Lauper song Goonies Are Good Enough, which we'll get to in a moment. And there was also a song on the soundtrack called 8 Arms to Hold You by the Goon Squad. And the filmmakers were convinced this song was going to be a huge hit, so they pressed it as a 12-inch dance single. But it sold miserably and is apparently one of the rarest, most valuable Goonie-related items out there. So if you have a copy of 8 Arms to Hold You by the Goon Squad on 12-inch, hold on to it. Also, a point of fact, 8 Arms to Hold You was the working title of the Beatles' second movie, Help. You know that?
Is that like a gangbang scenario?
No, it's one of the statue of the I believe fake Indian god Heigl with the 8 arms coming off of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sure. That's a weird movie.
Yeah, it is very much so.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of scenes from the Goonies that were cut from the theatrical release, but reinstated for cable broadcasts where scenes that had been deemed inappropriate for broadcast were cut, and they needed to make up the running time, so they put these previously deleted scenes back in, which is really interesting, kind of weird. I'm not totally sure if the octopus scene is one of them that made it onto the TV broadcasts. I've heard some accounts that it did make it onto TV airings. But there's another scene earlier in the movie that definitely did. It's when the Goonies stop at a convenience store early in their adventure. Mikey compares his treasure map to a modern map. Chunk buys junk food. And probably most crucially to the plot is the scene where the Goonies meet Steph, Andy, and the rich bully Troy for the first time. I think Troy's dad is the one that's trying to destroy the Goonies' home and make a golf course or something out of it. Troy threatens to use the treasure map as a rolling paper and light it up. Brand shows up to defend his little brother Mikey, and then it cuts to Brand riding his bike home when Troy pulls up alongside him in his Mustang and tries to run him off the road. Remember, he holds on to his hand when he's on his bike and like runs him to the edge of the cliff and just like sends him off. Yeah, it's pretty freaky. So that whole scene makes a lot more sense that they just had like a fight earlier on in the day, because otherwise, just out of context, it seems like a pretty aggressive thing for somebody to do that we've not really seen in the movie before. Basically tries to kill him for no reason.
Now we must come to a segment we like to call Monkey Business. That's I got nothing.
Hey,
monkey
they're the
around.
monkeys.
Hey, they're the monkeys.
Yes.
They're not monkeys, though. Gorillas are apes.
You're right. Oh,
Son
I'm
of
sorry.
a bitch. We threw this whole conceit off.
Oh, man. Well, yes, there was a whole subplot in the Goonies involving escaped gorillas that Spielberg insisted on being in there. I love this so much. There were a few scenes that were left on the cutting room floor. One where the Goonies protested against the demolition of their neighborhood, and another where Data tries out a gadget called the Intimidator, which puffs air into his shirt to make him look muscular, not unlike a pufferfish. But the most bizarre, easily, was this whole elaborate subplot involving 2 gorillas who'd escaped from a zoo. This was scripted, this was storyboarded, this was even shot. This was one of Spielberg's ideas, and he loved it so much. He insisted on it, even going so far as directing the sequences himself, to the apparent chagrin of actual director Richard Donner. It begins when the Goonies are underground signaling for help by banging on the underground pipes. We've talked about the scene a few times. This sets off a chain of chaotic events in town, and one of them was going to be that these 2 gorillas, Bonzo and Bertha, escaped from a local zoo. And they were going to run amok through the town for the rest of the movie, hijacking a golf cart and then later stealing Troy's red Mustang and embarking on a French Connection-style car chase with stunt drivers. It was just going to be this random element that would keep popping up through the rest of the movie. And Spielberg was so enthusiastic about this subplot that Donner was like, you know what? How about you direct it yourself? So he did this like really complex, probably very expensive series of scenes.
I just found this thing from Willamette Week, which is, I believe, an Oregon publication.
Oh, please.
Talking about the ape scene. Well, it's like an oral history of it filming in Astoria, with a bunch of local residents quoted. Dave Johnson, a retired Astoria Police Department officer, had this to say about the gorilla scene, which is hilarious. There were 2 gorillas in a Mustang convertible. They wrecked a brand new car, but it was never part of the movie. There was a part on the dock.
It's like in the French Connection when they accidentally crash into a real car.
He says there's a part on the dock during the big car chase. They were supposed to come flying down the dock. One police car was supposed to go through the railing and land at a boat. Somebody screwed up, and the Jeep that they were driving, a rental they'd gotten in Portland that they weren't supposed to mess up, someone mistimed it, and the police car hit the back of it. The police car landed on the boat where it was supposed to go. Donner goes, "Somebody get me a car. I got to go fire somebody." Oh, so the ape scene, Spielberg's insistence on this gorilla chase scene cost someone their job when a stunt involving a police car went awry.
For those of us who've never seen Richard Donner, just what actor would you get to play him? How would you sum up that pissed off, exhausted energy? Harrison
Oscar
Ford,
Isaac?
really?
Well,
It's
yeah,
got- yeah, like that.
I'm the idiot who crashed on the runway.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems about right. But this was all cut, supposedly, because Richard Donner reshot the ending of the movie. And Christopher Columbus's original script had the film end at Mikey's house, the Walsh house, where Rosalita, the maid, would find the bag of jewels that Mikey had taken off the ship while doing the laundry, thus providing the family with the cash to save their house and save their neighborhood. And then the gorillas were going to show up. And then the gorillas show up.
And then the gorillas show up.
Cigar shopping executive. And at the end of the movie, the gorillas show up at the Walsh house as they're all celebrating. And then they're finally apprehended by the cops and taken back to the zoo. None of this has anything to do with the plot of the movie at all. Spielberg just loved apes on apes on the loose, I guess. But Richard Donner, he just felt that this scene at the house felt like such a small ending to such a, an epic movie. They just had a Errol Flynn style swashbuckling fight on a pirate ship, and now they're in this kind of rundown house. But Donner wanted to be able to see the pirate ship sail away at the end of the movie. So he decided to reshoot the ending at Incola State Park by Haystack Rock, that very distinctive rock formation. And you get that epic shot of One-Eyed Willy's pirate ship sailing away. Funnily enough, in the ending, some of the parents of the Goonies are their parents in real life. I think Chuck's parents are in that scene. And Richard Donner actually shows up as a cameo on an ATV. So there you go. You will be able to get to see Richard Donner if you watch the Goonies. So you get Donner, but there's no gorillas rolling into the ending. The official reason that this whole gorilla subplot was cut was because it lost its conclusion when they reshot the ending at the beach. I don't know if they just deemed it too expensive to get all those stunt drivers back or what. You could have the gorillas just show up on the beach, I guess. But Donner axed it. I have a funny feeling he was just looking for an excuse to get rid of it.
They just pan away and there's two gorillas like sitting there arm in arm.
Yeah. And these Spielberg directed gorilla sequences have never been seen in full. There have been a few behind the scenes photos that have surfaced in recent years and a rough work print of part of one of the car chase scenes. But other than that, it remains in Spielberg's vault of special things.
It's just the scene from Raiders. Now we must talk about my beloved Cyndi Lauper and the song.
You're a big fan.
Oh, I love Cyndi Lauper. Yeah, I have a whole sidebar and I didn't even get to write in here, but I'm going to talk about it, which is the professional wrestling tie-in. Goonies Are Good Enough, the theme song to the Goonies. Cyndi was asked by Spielberg directly, and she agreed to do a 12-minute, two-part music video for the song, which includes a cameo from Spielberg, along with a who's who of professional wrestling at the time. Cyndi Lauper had such a connection to 80s wrestling culture, it rules. She met Captain Lou Albano, a wrestling personality manager, on a plane from Puerto Rico, and when it came time to shoot the Girls Just Want to Have Fun video, she wanted to put him in there, and this led to like a long-standing association with it. She was basically invited on to do WWF promotions. And I didn't know this, but because of that, and because she was such an MTV star, there was this whole synergy between MTV and professional wrestling at the time. MTV broadcast the first live wrestling match on cable television, and at Cyndi Lauper's behest, the first live professional wrestling match between women.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And so one of the ones with Andy Kaufman?
Sadly, no. Anyway, Corey Feldman was a massive Cyndi Lauper fan, and he was super pumped that she was doing a song for this until he heard it, subsequently saying, "It was terrible, the worst song I've ever heard Cyndi Lauper do." But it went to number 1. Even though she has also said it was not a particular favorite of hers, she didn't play it live for over 20 years. It eventually debuted in her True Colors tour in 2007. Apparently, in her autobiography, she talks about a meeting she had with Steven Spielberg to discuss their ideas for the music video for this. And at one point, she told him his ideas were not very creative, which ended the subsequently ended the meeting. Yeah, but she pushed to have the Bangles on the soundtrack. That was again at her behest. And Oscar and Grammy-winning composer Dave Grusin, His original score for this was just not issued for very many years, but the cue that he wrote for Fratelli Chase has just popped up in a bunch of different movie trailers, including Inner Space, the Steven Spielberg produced movie. So that for a while you could just hear that part of the score in movie trailers, which is so funny because it's kind of like how Clint Mansell and Kronos Quartet wrote this piece for Requiem for a Dream, which is called, I think, Lux Aeterna, and it just got this second life of its own. You would just see it. It was in like Lord of the Rings trailer, and like you would just see it get popped up, completely divorced of its context as like a just go-to trailer music. I always just love that. That's so funny to me. Speaking of the Fratellis, speaking of music.
Oh yeah, for me, the best part of the Goonies musical legacy is that it inspired the name for the mid-2000s Scottish rock band the Fratellis. Like the song Chelsea Dagger. That song whips, and also Whistle for the Choir. It's a great song. Shout out to my friend Katie if she's listening. She loved that song. Got a lot of personal shout outs in this one.
Yeah.
This brings us to
the rest.
And the rest.
And the rest.
Let's go to the box office stats. The Goonies was released in June 1985 and initially trailed behind Rambo First Blood Part 2 at the box office, which must have pissed Robert Davi off to no end. That's the movie that he was supposed to be in also. It ultimately made $124 million on a $19 million budget, making it the 9th highest grossing movie of the year. Critics' responses were largely positive. Roger Ebert, I don't know. I mean, I do know why we're going for him. He's Roger Ebert, but he had a great review. It's a fantastical story of buried pirate treasure told with a slice of life approach that lets these kids use words Bogart didn't know in Casablanca. What a phrase. Over the years, various sequels and spin-offs have been proposed, including an idea for a Cartoon Network series that would have seen Corey Feldman reprise the role of Mouth.
Good thing that one stayed on the old development slate.
Of all the characters to base a spinoff around. All right. In 2007, a musical adaptation was proposed, but even though Spielberg and Donner discussed it, project went nowhere. Like a Broadway show, that could have been cool. So, okay, cool, in quotes. In February 2020, Sarah Watson, the creator of the show The Bold Type, began work on a pilot drama series in which a woman helps film students create a shot-for-shot remake of The Goonies. I don't know anything more about that. That's fascinating to me. I like really, really specific shows like that.
It's the plot of Be Kind Rewind.
Oh, you're right.
Except they're true. Video store employees, but yeah.
In interviews for years, Sean Astin insisted that a Goonies sequel was an absolute certainty, just a question of when. There's an IMDb page for Goonies 2 that's slated for 2027, which is hell of a long way off. The possibility of a sequel began circulating sometime around the early 2000s when Goonies director Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg were on board for a story, but Warner Brothers apparently wasn't interested in a sequel, despite the fact that many of the original stars had expressed interest in appearing in it. I mean, as much as I'm kind of opposed to doing later era sequels of beloved movies, seems like kind of a miss. I'd be at least curious. Yeah. It's like not quite long enough for it to be 100% definitely terrible. If it was, 16 years later? Like, I'm curious how that would have gone, but never came together. And I guess Corey Feldman and Sean Astin later pitched their own sequel idea in apparently as late as 2019, but never came to fruition due to a combination of high budget requirements and the cast and crew's inability to come to a consensus about a story. And then Richard Donner's death in July 2021 almost certainly put an end to the dream of a Goonies sequel. Or a nightmare. Corey Feldman more or less said as much in August of this year that it's probably not going to happen. And he, for one, is sort of glad because sequels ruin everything.
Yeah, Quan echoed that in April, saying, I feel like after Donner's passing, I'm kind of at peace with leaving that movie alone now. Even though I want Goonies 2 to happen, I'm kind of at a place where I think it should just be the way it is. We shouldn't mess with it. Agreed. There's just a tremendous story that comes out of the end of this shoot. Even though
it's a perfect way to end. I love this.
Poor Richard Donner, I mean, had to watch his former protege become a much larger director than him and possibly take over his shoot. He was stressed out constantly by dealing with children. His quote in the making of documentary is, I think the most unique thing about working with this many kids is that every night I'm contemplating suicide. It is the most difficult thing I've ever thought I was going to get into.
Did you watch this clip? Like, there's no humor in his face as he says this.
But so by the time the shoot was over, Donner was just thrilled to get back. He couldn't wait to get back to his home in Maui in Hawaii and just relax without a bunch of children around. But Spielberg, that son of a bitch, wouldn't let this happen. For the last week of the shoot, Donner had noticed that the kids were acting a little cold, a little standoffish towards him. And they had been shooting for 5 months for this, so they'd become very close, and this freaked him out a little bit. So he tries to put it out of his mind, flies back to Maui, where he runs into some neighbor who has this excuse to keep him out of the house all day, errands or something. And by the time he finally gets back to his house, the entire cast of the Goonies, along with all of their spouses and partners, are hanging out at his house, having come directly from the airport, luggage and all. Spielberg flew them all down there for a wrap party barbecue. And Donner's other neighbor, Alice Cooper, came by to party as well. There was a film crew on hand as well to film all of this. And according to the documentary, The Unauthorized Story of the Goonies, things got a little too out of hand for this to be included on the special features of a rated PG movie. But it's out there somewhere, folks. If you can get it, we'll Venmo you $5.
This time we'll Venmo you.
Yeah.
Well, to close out, I'd like to read a section from another deleted scene in this movie where Andy and Steph take the sacred Goonie oath. Never made it in the movie, but I personally said this oath before we started taping, so I'm already a Goonie. But Heigl, if you'd be so kind as to repeat after me, and anyone else listening at home, please feel free to follow along and repeat as well. I will never betray my Goondock friends.
I will never betray my Goondock friends.
We will stick together until the whole world ends.
We will stick together until the whole world ends.
Through heaven and hell and nuclear war.
Through heaven and hell and nuclear war.
Good pals like us will stick like tar.
Good pals like us will stick like tar.
Doesn't rhyme, but we'll okay. In the city or the country or the forest or the boonies.
In the city or the country or the forest or the boonies.
I am proudly declared a fellow Goonie.
I am proudly declared a fellow Goonie.
Congratulations, Heigl. Congratulations to all of you at home. Well, Goonies never say die, so we'll just say until next time. This has been too much information. My name's Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl. And until that one last Goonie weekend, we'll see you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.